This video is designed for people who draw figures in scenes, in landscapes, particularly in streetscapes, that aren't the main subject. This isn't about figure drawing, but about an appropriate style or technique for drawing figures when they are a more peripheral subject in our scene. Right now, this demo is 4 times drawing speed. For the rest of the video, where I'm actually doing some figures and talking through my process, they've been increased to double speed. So if you want to watch me draw them actual speed, use the cog icon you can see on your screen to reduce the speed to half speed, and the voiceover will still be understandable. Figures are a great subject to put into the streetscape, and if we avoid them because we're not confident with them, we will end up creating often very artificial looking streets, because cars and people, well, they are a part of the urban landscape, and sometimes they're a very important part. So learning to do figures that suit this scale, but which are also not generic, which are interesting and in some way, at least in a subtle way, sit back and look as if they're real people, is a very important technique. It certainly was the weakest part of my drawings originally, and therefore I had to put extra effort into it. But it is a subject that we can practice separately from the rest of the scene, and therefore we can improve in it more rapidly. And if you're finding this interesting, why not hit the like button for me? How do you think these ones are going? Let me explain to you now the process I have in my mind, particularly into my pen. I think one of the most important things is that we get the proportions of the body correct. Something I often see are figures where the proportions just aren't right. And while we can obviously allow for the fact that there is huge variety in the proportions of people, there is a point where, no, this person isn't built this way, it's just not been well drawn. The other important thing is that if the people in the crowd are, if you like, a support act for the architecture or the overall streetscape, they're not the main subject, and so we don't want them to be the main subject. They are going to be in the peripheral vision, which means we can simplify the positions and we can eliminate trying to do poses that are more complex and therefore more challenging to get right. We want to keep our poses, our positioning, relatively simple for all our figures, and therefore make it easier for them not to draw attention to themselves because they look awkward in some way. The way I think when I draw to try and avoid this sort of thing is I firstly get a sense of the scale of the figure in my drawing. And I certainly, if there's more than 1 or 2 figures, work out where is eye level and are all the heads approximately on the same level. Now this street here starts to slope downwards from about here onwards, and so the heads start to drop. But we can see here the perspective principle that on level ground, the height of the average adult head is going to line up. What changes is where the feet go. The closer a figure is, the further down the drawing the feet will go. And the further away they are, the higher up the drawing the feet will be. But the proportions of the figure still needs to be correct, whether it's far or close. So when I draw the head, I need to draw a head that's the right sort of size, the right sort of scale. So let's look at this figure here. Now, exactly how we draw does depend on the scale. The number of lines I put into a figure depends on how close it is. And you can see that there was a lot more detail in this figure, as simplified as it is, than these figures back here, or than this figure here. I like to leave a gap between the head and the body or the shoulders. I can always fill it in with a collar or something if I want, but I just find it helps to keep the head sitting high enough. A common fault is that heads seem to be attached directly onto bodies. Now I've got this backpack. It's sitting kind of over the waist, so therefore I feel the need to draw it in at this point. I'm really looking at the elbows and positioning the elbows And then we have the waist in here. Generally, I find that it's better to try not to put too much detail in the legs simply because it is challenging to get right when we're drawing on a small scale. But basically, when I look at a figure, I'm thinking, where's the head going to be? Where is the waist? And where are the feet going to be? And then I pay attention to what I see as key positioning things, which are the top of the head, the shoulders, the elbows, the waist, and where the feet are, but also where the knees are if the legs aren't straight. While it's good to capture a few different poses, we don't want all of our figures to look exactly the same. And particularly in a crowd, even if we draw them relatively small, we still want to get the sense that they're facing different directions. Some are walking, some are stopped, some are talking. And so we get a sense of someone now who is slouching rather than striding for some purpose. If I'm drawing a large crowd scene, I will, though, go to some sort of simplification such as this in the distance. But I'll at least give a sense of feet and hair, albeit in a very gestural way. Looking at this figure here, it's important to draw things such as backpacks before we try and draw the figure under them. Exactly where the waist is can be hidden by jackets that come down. But generally, probably the most common issue I see is where the legs are simply not long enough. And this loose style is very good at being able to extend sometimes what we've drawn. So whereas I pictured it at the start these lines as the end of his feet, I can add feet now to what was the soles of his feet, and it actually gives us a more in proportion feel. Learning how to make adjustments when we've finished is really important, but these are figures that are closer. If I were drawing this figure further away, it would be simpler and it would also have a slightly lighter effect in a line sense. And the further back we go, the more simplified it becomes. But the important thing is always to keep the proportions of the person looking credible for a person. It's always, for me, where's the top of the head in our scene, and then where are the feet. The other thing I look for is alignment of the head with what the legs are doing. So with this figure here, the head kind of sits above this leg here. And in this figure, it sits more or less over the center line. Once I've drawn the head, I also look to see, for instance, where the shoulders go and what we can see of the shoulders and how far back the back comes from the head. When I've just drawn the head is actually the only reference point I've got, so I need to use it for the rest of the body. And so adjusting the detail that we draw for the scale of our scene and how important the figure is also in the overall scene is important. A figure that looks as though it's doing something will also draw a little more attention than a figure that simply appears to be almost disinterestedly walking past, especially at a distance. The great thing if figures is a weakness is we can just go outside into a crowded scene, take a photo and come home and practice. Practice not trying to draw too much, but get the proportions correct. And one great little tip is don't rush to color in with line work, the tops or the bottoms that the figures are wearing. Because I make that decision on whichever article of clothing needs to cover up some lines that aren't quite in the right place. And so my hatching lines let me do that, whether it's in the jeans or whether it's in a jacket on top. So we want to keep that option open until we've done the figure and know what we're trying to hide. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope this is helpful. Look, I'll post this scene on my channel community page if you want to have a go, but most of us can just go to a crowded local location and take a photo that we can use for practice. But with that, we don't want to get too close to too many figures. We want to develop a style where the figures are readable and they add interest and narrative to our scene, but where they don't become the main subject. But look, whatever figures you draw, whyever you draw them and however you draw them, and however they end up looking, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.